This episode of the Beef Market Update is brought to you by Brett Young. You treat them like family, feed them like family. Talk to your retailer about Brett Young's forage and corn options for a happy, healthy herd.
And welcome back to Real Ag Radio, broadcasting from the NCBA CattleCon here in Orlando, Florida. Enjoying the warm weather. And joined right now by great friend Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, how are you doing?
It's good to be here, Shaun. Good to see you.
Yeah, some nice warm weather. The end of January as the calendar flips to February. This is really the largest cattle convention in North America. Delegates from Mexico, Canada, and of course the United States all gather together to discuss all things that are happening in the beef markets. A lot happening right now. I guess from your perspective, what are you looking forward to this week finding out?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of things going on just at the convention itself, but also from a market perspective. We've got some big reports coming out, one of them this afternoon in terms of the U.S. cattle inventory report, and then even just looking broader from a market perspective going out into the first part of February, we've got the next cattle on feed report and another grain report. They're going to give us a good view of what to expect in these markets to start off 2024. But at the same time, there is so much more to see here at convention. We're going to hear about weather. We're going to, and of course, that's something that's on our mind if we live in Western Canada. In a lot of parts, not just us, but certainly personally, we'll be looking at that. But all kinds of things, the sustainability meetings, some of the political meetings that are going on in terms of trade, all the rest of it. So there is so much that really they cover every gamut here. There's always something to see and always something going on.
Yeah, and we're recording this from the media room, and you've run into you got more friends here than I do, which is a lot of people talking about some of the same stuff. I think there's a lot of questions about 24, and one of the ones that I've heard a lot in this room here this morning is questions about can we sustain demand based on the supply that we have in front of us.
Yeah, that is on everyone's mind, especially with inflation still, granted slowing, but still very much sticky, if you will. The interest rate impact still out there. Just what's going on as consumers are dealing with these higher costs. So demand is at the forefront, especially here in 24, until we get past some of these questions about how things unfold, and not just here in the U.S., in Asian countries, South American countries, us in Canada. So that's a big, I won't say stickler, but certainly a focus that everybody's on. And we don't have some good answers for, not ahead of time anyways.
Yeah, and we got some reports that are coming out, like you mentioned, today one of them. I guess, what are we looking for there? What signals will tell us in terms of what things to watch out for? The sort of getting the signal from the noise.
Yeah, so certainly the expectations are to see the U.S. beef cow herd 2.5% smaller than last year. That's kind of what's in the market, if you will. So we'll see what the report says. We'll also be watching to see, look for revisions, USDA revisions to prior years. If you recall what happened with the hog report at the end of 2023, and lots of revisions back a couple of years. So that's always kind of, was something we weren't expecting. So anyways, we're looking for a smaller cow herd because we simply haven't seen any retention of heifers going on, whether we're talking about the U.S., whether we're talking about Canada. And why do we know that, or how do we know that? We just continue to see big heifer placements. Earlier in 23, looking for that signal we'll be watching for as we go through 24, start to see if those heifer placements start to slow up, meaning maybe that some start to stay in the herd. But guess what's got to happen before any of that? We've got to listen to Matt Makins and the weather guy and find out what's going to go on with moisture. That precipitates all the rest of this.
Yeah, it was interesting. That's another conversation in here. I've been talking to a few of my friends from the Northern Plains sitting in the media room here, and it's the same boat. There's desire to, I would love to buy, I heard this morning, I would love to buy 100 new cows. Trouble is, I need grass to sustain that, and so that prevents that from happening. We're going to be interviewing Matt Makins. We're going to have that, of course, on the website, but that really is holding us back.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's not year one. I mean, many of us are, 3 going into potentially year 4 of drought. And if you're in some of the areas, and I don't know if you've talked to anybody recently, Shaun, in terms of the water situation for southern Alberta, all those pieces are huge in terms of what goes on. So that's going to be a key point because we can't keep those 100 cows until we get the grass. And it's not a one-year thing. We've now been stuck in this one for a while. So we need a big change.
How's the feed yard feeling right now?
Not good. We went from 2023 on average being a pretty good year. I know at the end of the year it ended up with some negative margins, but it came off as one of the best years, and then we've kind of flipped it right on its heads. We've come into some high break-evens, and of course the market's stalling out. And if you're in Western Canada, the market's actually come off a little bit from where it was before we ended 23. So we've gone from one extreme to the other. So granted, it's the front end of it, but we've got some high break-even cattle to get through.
And that's with corn pulling back considerably. Are we still? Were a lot of them hedging feed way out in front? Do we still have some expensive feed that we're getting through these cattle?
Everybody's different, but certainly some of that was going on where you bought what you needed to get through the winter season for 23-24, or a percentage of it anyways. So there's going to be some of that impact for sure. But going forward, certainly the sign of last year's record corn crop, very comfortable stocks to use ratio. I think we'll hear that from Cattle Facts, when they do their update on Friday. So those will be some of the positives that I think are going to be great support if you're listening to this as a cow-calf or a stocker operator. Great support to feeder cattle and calf prices in 24, but margins on the feedlot level, I think that could be a little different story than 23.
Yeah, and Canada's still pulling a lot of feeder cattle north, is my understanding.
Yeah, we won't beat 21's. We don't have the December data in yet, but we won't beat, in my opinion, 21's record, but we'll be awfully close to the second biggest. So let's call it around 300,000 head is what I expect when the final data comes in. In 21, it was 377,000 head, but still, it's a big import. This is obviously a supply of feeder cattle on an ongoing basis for Western Canadian feedlots, period.
Yeah. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm curious. As we were talking here, I thought of something where in cropping, we're like, oh, this reminds me a lot of 84. Or with weather, we're like, oh, yeah, because Matt Makins will probably say, and I'm making up years here, but he's going to be like, yeah, 1989, 90, 91. We reference years. When you think back on your career as a cattle analyst, is there a time that this reminds you of? From a cycle perspective, when we had strong supplies, really questionable margins at the feed yard level, and demand feels somewhat like it's sort of like on not quicksand, but it's sort of like it's shaky ground.
Well, the last cycle would have been the 2015 cycle in terms of cattle number lows in terms of the U.S. lows and high cattle prices in terms of that relationship. This one doesn't feel quite so. In terms of timing, that would be what fits the best. But at the same time, that was a very quick cycle, made a bottom, kept heifers, the rain came, replaced the heifers quickly. So this one's different. Certainly supplies have tightened, but we're still dealing with weather issues, so we haven't retained the heifers. So this one feels different from that perspective. And probably, if you look at from the peak in 2019 in terms of the U.S. cattle cycle to where we sit today, we've had a pretty big drawdown in numbers, way more than we've seen in recent cycles. So this one feels a little different in terms of it's deeper in how much we're cutting back supply. The question on demand, though, is still in everybody's mind. I don't know how you compare that one to... Historically, demand levels are still relatively good. Yeah, they're not as good as 21 and 22, but historically, these are still pretty good demand levels. So I think that's something to keep in the back of your mind.
Well, based on some of the price discrepancies between beef and pork at the store right now, thank goodness beef tastes so good.
We have a lot to lean on there, and I think that producers need to remember that, right? I mean, quality, taste, tenderness, all those things have really gotten us where we are versus previous cattle cycles where I think, especially if you go back 20 and 30 years ago, where we were really struggling on the quality front.
Well, you're no longer president of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. What do you do with all your time now?
Oh, there is so much to do here. Trust me. I still go to the meetings because, once you've got an interest, whether it's markets, whether it's sustainability, whether it's weather, whether it's politics, whether it's trade, you still go to the meetings. It's always interesting to get an update on what's going on, whether you're sitting at the executive table or just here as a producer.
Trade, that's one, of course, that's talked about a lot here. And you and I have been talking about the importance of keeping up that export demand for not only the Canadian industry, but also the U.S. industry. With the coming 2026 CUSMA USMCA trade renegotiation, it's not a big topic of discussion here, but the 10% tariff that's being talked about, what would happen if there was a 10% tariff on all Canadian live cattle going south or beef going south? What would that do to the market?
Well, Shaun, we've learned many times before, whether we go back to BSE, whether we go back to mandatory country of origin labeling. I mean, any time some thickness, whatever it might be, occurs at that border, it is immediately and equivalently the discount to Canadian cattle or beef. So that one's a no-brainer. It has a direct and immediate, and when supplies get out of balance, even more than a direct discount. But it's clearly what happens to the entire Canadian beef industry. It's not just that piece that's being exported, it's the entire Canadian industry.
Yeah, I'm always reminded when I come down, this is one of my favorite meetings of the year, and people are going to be like, oh, you say that about every meeting, but this one, I really, really enjoy this meeting, the Cattle Con, the NCBA convention. And one of we're day one here, and one of the very, very quick reminders is just the integration. Like, somebody walked up to me and said, hey, Shaun, how's it going? I listen to you all the time. Hey, how's the grass conditions up there? Like, it's a rancher from North Dakota, right? So I think it's just that reminder about how integrated the flow back and forth through the supply chain, not just finished product, but through the supply chain, just how, and you include Mexico in that too.
Yeah, and now, of course, we're talking about feeder cattle, we're talking about fed cattle, we're talking about beef. So the integration is clear. It moves both directions, as we've identified, depending on what flows where, east-west. We supply the beef in the west, and it flows south, and in the east there are deficits, so it flows north. So it's an evolving situation, 365 days of the year, and that's been the way for a long, long time.
You gonna get time while you're down here in Orlando to hit Disney World?
No.
No. Well, you don't have the grandkids with you.
No grandkids on this one. Just an anniversary tomorrow.
That's right. Congratulations. 11 years.
Yes.
Good. That's, awesome. Congratulations to you and Barry. Happy anniversary. No better way to celebrate it than here at NCBA Cattle Convention. So, and thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's great to do this in person.
I loved it. This was great. Thanks, Shaun.